They laughed when he walked in, not loudly, just enough to make it sting. Snickers tucked behind phones, glances traded like secrets, because to them he was just an old man with a limp, a faded coat, and no medals on his chest, just a strange tattoo on his wrist that looked more like a mistake than a memory. And when the principal introduced him as a local veteran, a few students chuckled. One even whispered "stolen valor" under his breath. But all of it stopped the moment the gym doors opened, and a Navy SEAL walked in, young, clean, sharp in full dress uniform, and without hesitation, without scanning the crowd or acknowledging the podium. He marched straight past the banner, past the rows of confused students, past the teacher's frozen mid-applause, and dropped to one knee in front of the old man no one respected just moments earlier. And in that breathless instant, the silence in the room became heavier than any speech, because what was once mockery had just transformed into reverence, and every phone was lowered, every mouth shut, every heart caught in its own disbelief, and the old man. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just looked down at the SEAL in front of him with eyes that had seen more than any of them would ever understand. And that's where the Real story begins. He didn't want to come to the school that day, not because he disliked children or crowds, but because he knew what silence felt like in a room full of people who didn't care if you were once a soldier or just a shadow. And as he stepped into the gymnasium, the sound of sneakers scraping the bleachers and casual chatter hung in the air like noise that had never learned respect. He walked with a limp, subtle but constant, the kind that doesn't seek attention but announces history with every step. He wore a dark coat, pressed but worn, and a plain button-up shirt beneath it. No ribbons, no hat, no rank. The principal had insisted he come, said it would be a nice gesture for the Veterans Day program, and so he agreed reluctantly, out of habit more than hope. A few teachers nodded politely as he passed. Most students didn't even look up. One kid leaned over to his friend and said something with a smirk, earning a burst of muffled laughter. The old man didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, much worse. He took a seat in the folding chair nearest the wall, away from the stage, blending into the background like a maintenance worker no one called by name. A few students whispered about his tattoo, the jagged black ink peeking from beneath his left cuff, a shape no one could quite name. One girl said it looked like something from an old video game. Another said maybe he was just faking it to get attention. The principal began speaking, his voice bouncing off the walls with hollow enthusiasm. He thanked the local veterans, nodded at the flag, quoted lines he'd printed from Google, and then gestured vaguely toward the man sitting alone. And finally, he said, "We have Mr. Grayson, who served in the Navy, I believe, many years ago." There was a moment of forced applause, short and awkward, like hands clapping out of obligation. The veteran nodded once, barely. He didn't stand. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just sat there, the corners of his mouth pulled tight, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a kind of resignation that only comes from living long enough to expect this kind of moment. Then, without warning, the side door of the gym opened. Every head turned. The air shifted. A young man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, in full navy dress blues, his medals shining faintly under the fluorescent lights. He didn't smile. He didn't slow. He walked with purpose, the kind of movement you don't learn in drills but in war. He didn't glance at the podium, didn't look at the flag, didn't even acknowledge the confused looks of the students. His eyes scanned the room once, landed on the old man, and held. Then he walked straight down the center aisle, every step echoing in the stunned silence. And when he reached the veteran's seat, he stopped. No words, no introduction, just a single deliberate motion. He dropped to one knee, eyes level with the old man's, and raised his hand in salute. The room didn't breathe. Phones that had been lifted for mockery were lowered in shame. The principal's script fluttered in his hands. A teacher pressed a hand to her chest. And the students, some with tears, some just stunned, sat frozen, watching a moment that none of them understood but all of them felt. The old man didn't salute back. He didn't need to. The SEAL held his position, unmoving, until the veteran finally nodded, just once. And in that one motion, everything the crowd thought they knew unraveled. The tattoo wasn't decoration. It was designation. The limp wasn't age. It was sacrifice. And the silence he carried like armor wasn't weakness. It was the burden of memory. When the seal finally stood, he turned to the crowd and spoke one sentence. Steady, strong, clear. This man saved 12 of us before I even knew how to hold a rifle. Then he walked away. No fanfare, no speech, just footsteps, and a room that would never again look at the old man the same way. They didn't talk about anything else for the rest of the day. Not the science quiz, not the canceled soccer game, not even the cafeteria's surprise free dessert tray. Every hallway whisper, every glance passed between lockers, every student who'd laughed earlier now carried something quieter in their voice. The video hit social media before lunch ended, not posted by the ones who mocked, but by a sophomore who just happened to catch the moment when the Navy SEAL dropped to one knee. No filters, no captions, just silence, reverence, and the stunned expression on every face in the gym. It was shared 500 times before the final bell. By sunset, it had gone viral. Some students tried to apologize in the comments, but none of them tagged the veteran because none of them even knew his first name. Mr. Grayson was all they had. The man who used to walk the edge of the morning crowd unnoticed now carried a shadow taller than the flagpole outside. And yet, he didn't speak. He didn't respond. He didn't stand taller or smile more. The next day, he was seen at the diner just past Main Street, seated at his usual booth in the back, black coffee cooling beside him, reading a paperback with creased pages and a cracked spine. A few students passed by the window and stopped, unsure whether to go in. One of them left a note folded in half under his cup when he wasn't looking. It read, "I'm sorry for yesterday. I'll never forget today." But Mr. Grayson didn't acknowledge it. Not out of anger. Simply because he never needed the apology to begin with. The truth was never for show. The teachers changed too. Coach Bennett, who once barked that discipline is earned, not inherited, began his next class by pulling down a projector screen and playing the video without a word. Miss Howard paused her literature lesson to read aloud a soldier's letter from Vietnam. Even the principal, who'd once mispronounced Mr. Grayson's name during a meeting, quietly removed his own nameplate from the front office door and replaced it with a quote. Some men are quiet because the truth speaks louder than they ever could, but perhaps the most striking change came from the students. The ones who had snickered now stared at the old man when he passed with wide, watchful eyes. Some offered a nervous sir. Others simply stood back, giving him space like royalty. Devin was the only one brave enough to say something. He caught up with Mr. Grayson in the parking lot, breathless from nerves more than speed. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought." But his voice faded under the weight of his own shame. Mr. Grayson didn't stop walking. He just said, calmly, "That's the thing about history, son. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It just waits to be remembered." And then he turned the corner, disappearing behind the wall of the old gym, leaving Devin standing there, hands in his pockets, trying to imagine what kind of man carried that kind of silence for so long without ever asking the world to listen. That night, someone taped a sketch to the wall outside the auditorium. Charcoal on scrap paper. The drawing showed Mr. Grayson from the back, seated alone, while a seal knelt before him. No name, no title, just one line scrawled beneath it. He never raised his voice. The world lowered itself instead. And for the first time in that school's history, the hallway went quiet. The following morning, a black SUV pulled into the school's back parking lot just after sunrise. It wasn't the kind of vehicle you'd mistake for a parent's car or a delivery van. It was matte, spotless, and didn't belong to anyone in town. Out stepped a man in a pressed suit with a sharp haircut and an expression so unreadable it made even the head custodian step back. He didn't head to the front office. He walked the halls like he'd memorized them. He found Mr. Grayson already unlocking the boiler room door. There was no greeting.
No handshake.
Just a look, and then a quiet, steady voice. "I told them not to contact you." Mr. Grayson didn't look up. They didn't. The man glanced around the empty hallway, then stepped closer. "That video is a problem. You know that." Mr. Grayson shrugged, slow and indifferent, like the weight of what was being said couldn't touch him anymore. "Not my problem if truth gets out." The man sighed, removed a small envelope from his coat, and handed it over. "They're opening files against my advice. You're going to be asked questions by people who don't understand what RSV stood for or what it cost." Mr. Grayson held the envelope but didn't open it. "Let them ask. You sure about this? It's been 40 years. I'm done hiding from ghosts." The man hesitated, then nodded. "We didn't forget you, you know." "You didn't remember either," Grayson said. And with that, the conversation ended. The man left without another word, disappearing down the hallway like a chapter that had waited too long to be turned. That night, Mr. Grayson sat at the far end of the VFW hall, where a dozen aging veterans gathered once a month to trade war stories and silence. Most of them hadn't spoken to him in years, not because of any feud, but because he'd always been the quiet one. But that evening, they left the seat next to him open. No one said anything until a younger man walked in, buzz cut, boots clean, still active duty. He looked barely 30. He nodded to the room, then looked directly at Mr. Grayson. "Sir," he said, "I know who you are." That stopped the room. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" The man stepped forward, voice low but certain. "My CO told me about Unit RSV, about the valley, about the man who carried 2 men out with a shattered leg and a radio that hadn't worked in hours. They said you didn't exist, that the op was blacked out. But you were real. You were him." Grayson didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He simply looked away and muttered, "I was tired of remembering alone." The young SEAL took a breath, then pulled something from his pocket. A patch, worn and weathered, with the faded outline of the same trident tattoo Grayson bore on his wrist. "We still train on your extraction method," he said. "It saved my team last year." Around the room, the old men fell silent. And for once, even Grayson blinked longer than usual, as if the words had hit somewhere deeper than muscle or bone. That night, no one asked him to speak. No one stood up or clapped. But when he left, they all did one thing in unison: stood. Not because they were told to, not because it was custom, but because sometimes respect is the only language that needs no orders. And Mr. Grayson, for the first time in decades, nodded back. The news didn't come from a newspaper or a press release. It came from a knock on the principal's door, a voice on the other side saying simply, "There's a request to honor Mr. Grayson at this year's Veterans Assembly. Official request. Military channels." The principal paused mid-sentence, a pen hovering over a discipline report. "From whom?" he asked. The secretary whispered, "The Department of the Navy." And just like that, the tone of the entire event changed. The banners were redone. The sound crew brought in extra lights. The seating plan shifted to make room for a special delegation, though no one would say from where. Rumors floated through the halls. Some said Mr. Grayson had saved a general. Others swore he was a spy. One theory suggested he had once faked his own death. But he came that morning the same way he always had. Walking quietly through the back gate, coat buttoned, hat low, hands in his pockets. If he noticed the upgraded flags or the murmurs following him down the hall, he gave no sign. He sat again near the wall, folding chair tucked slightly out of sight, just as he had 3 weeks earlier when the students had first laughed at him. This time there was no laughter. There was stillness. The gym was packed. Not just students and staff, but reporters in the back row, and 3 unfamiliar men in navy suits with pins shaped like stars. The crowd buzzed softly, not with amusement but anticipation. The principal began the ceremony with an odd nervousness. "Today," he said, "we welcome back a man we now realize we never truly welcomed at all." And when he gestured to the same man he once introduced with all the warmth of a bus schedule, this time, the applause did not sound forced. It sounded reverent. But Mr. Grayson didn't rise. Instead, something far quieter happened. From the back of the gym, a line of men walked in. 7 of them, all in dress blues, boots shining, eyes forward. At their lead, the same Navy SEAL who had knelt before him weeks prior. He said nothing. He didn't approach the stage. He simply walked to where Grayson sat, took a breath and dropped to one knee again. And then, one by one, so did the others. 7 seals, kneeling in silence before a man without a rank on his chest. The gym fell absolutely silent.
No phones lifted. No flashes flickered.
Even the air conditioning seemed to hush. And then, slowly, every student in the gym stood. Not from command. Not from ritual. But from something deeper, something even they didn't have words for. The principal tried to continue the program, but the moment had taken it from him. And Mr. Grayson, still seated, simply placed one hand on the seal's shoulder and whispered, "You're carrying the rest now." That was all. No speech. No photos. But when the seal stood, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. And when he saluted this time, it was not for tradition, it was for legacy. Afterward, the school quietly installed a plaque on the wall just outside the gym. It read, "Some men never needed a microphone." The silence around them spoke louder than applause. They didn't name it the Grayson Gym. He would have hated that. But the chair where he had sat, stage right, second row, tucked near the shadows, was never used again. They never told him about the chair. They didn't announce it over the intercom or ask for his permission. They just placed it quietly in the auditorium, second row from the front, a single folding chair left empty in every assembly, with a small brass plaque riveted to the backrest that simply read, "Reserved in honor of Mr. Thomas Grayson, for the mission he carried in silence." It was subtle, just the way he lived. No red carpet.
No spotlight.
No music. And for days he said nothing about it. Not when a student mentioned it passing him in the hallway. Not when a teacher left a thank you note folded under his locker. Not even when the principal shook his hand outside the parking lot and offered a nod heavier than words. He didn't need to respond. He had already spoken in the only language that mattered, steadiness. But something began to shift, quietly at first, then unmistakably. More students began arriving early to school, not to socialize or scroll their phones, but to stand silently near the auditorium door before first bell, just looking at the chair. Some left letters. Some knelt beside it. One boy, barely 15, left his junior ROTC pin taped gently to the armrest. When asked why, he just said, "Because I'm wearing his story now." The ripple spread beyond the school. A reporter picked up the story from a grainy cell phone video. A seal kneeling, an old man nodding, an entire gym going breathless. It aired late night on a local channel, and by morning, the headline had gone national. Silent hero revealed at school assembly. Seals kneel in his honor. Veterans from other towns drove hours to leave challenge coins beside that chair. A former Marine left a set of tags. A Gold Star mother left a rose. Still, Mr. Grayson never spoke to cameras. He didn't write a memoir. He didn't appear on talk shows. Instead, he kept showing up every morning before first bell, sweeping the hallway, adjusting chairs, checking fire extinguishers. He didn't change, but the world around him did. Devin, who once whispered jokes during that first assembly, now walked Mr. Grayson to his truck most afternoons. Other students joined him, not out of guilt, but reverence. They began calling him Sir. Not because someone told them to, but because the silence demanded it. And one day, something happened that Mr. Grayson could not ignore. A little girl, probably third grade, ran up to him outside the school cafeteria. No fear, no hesitation, just the innocence of someone who hadn't yet learned how invisible older people become. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand, slightly wrinkled, colored in blue crayon. It was a picture of him and the seal, both of them standing beneath a flag that read, "Thank you for being brave when I was not even born." Grayson took the paper slowly, stared at it for a long time, then looked at the girl. "You know what bravery means?" he asked, voice low and firm. She shook her head. "It means doing what you have to do," he said. "Even when no one is looking, even when it hurts, especially then." She nodded, not fully understanding, but somehow sensing that what she'd heard mattered more than any textbook. That night, Mr. Grayson sat at his table alone, lights low, window open to the sound of a quiet town. He unfolded the drawing again, smoothing its creases with fingers that had once pressed field dressings into wounds by feel alone. And for the first time in years, he wept. Not for sorrow, not for regret, but for the simple fact that silence had finally been heard. They found him on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise, seated in the same chair outside his trailer where he often watched the light come up over the rooftops. He was dressed in his usual coat, sleeves rolled once, the faint outline of that old tattoo barely visible beneath time-worn skin. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. His boots were clean, and he was gone. No struggle, no call for help, just a quiet exit, the way he had lived, without needing to be seen. The coroner said it was peaceful. In his sleep, likely before dawn. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Students began showing up at the school even before it opened, some still in pajamas, some with flowers, others with nothing but silence. Teachers stood in the hallway without knowing what to say. The principal didn't speak. He just unlocked the auditorium and left the door open. Within an hour, the entire gym was full. They didn't play music. They didn't project photos. They just sat quietly, staring at that one empty chair in the second row, the one with his name. At noon, the Navy SEAL returned. Not in uniform this time. Jeans, boots, a black shirt with the sleeves pushed up to reveal his own trident tattoo. A newer one, brighter ink, but the same symbol. He walked to the chair, dropped to one knee like he had the first time, and placed a folded American flag across it. Then he stood and addressed no one in particular. He didn't ask to be remembered, he said, voice steady. But we owe him that much. The town declared the next day a day of recognition. Not a holiday, not a celebration, just a day to pay attention to the people who are usually overlooked. A group of students repainted the sidewalk outside the school, adding the words, "Carry the silence with respect." The brass plaque from his chair was removed and replaced with a polished steel version, etched deeper so time wouldn't wear it down. Beneath it, they added a second line. He taught us that being quiet doesn't mean being small. His funeral was simple, just as he would have wanted.
No speeches.
No gun salutes, just a wooden casket, a line of people stretching 4 blocks long, and 7 Navy SEALs walking in silence behind him. The young SEAL, the one who had knelt before him twice, carried the flag in both hands. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But when they lowered the casket, he stepped forward, removed his own trident patch from his sleeve, and tucked it into the folds of the flag. Then he saluted one last time. In the weeks that followed, the story didn't fade. It grew. Not through headlines or hashtags, but in smaller ways. A kid in 3rd period stood up to say, "Don't talk about people like that." A janitor at another school found a handwritten thank you card taped to his cart. A teacher started beginning class with a minute of silence, not for meditation but for memory. And in those quiet moments, something lingered, something not loud, not branded, not performative. Just the simple truth that one man, who never needed the spotlight, had reminded an entire town, and maybe beyond, that some heroes carry their mission far beyond the battlefield. They carry it in mop buckets, in broken knees, in the way they never look down on anyone, even when everyone else looks away. And sometimes the greatest tribute isn't what we say. It's what we finally stop doing. We stop laughing. We stop assuming. We stop forgetting. And we start remembering, not just who they were, but how they moved through the world. Quiet, steady, unshakable, like a salute held long after the crowd is gone. Thank you for staying until the end. If the story moved something in you, remember, there are still veterans out there who walk quietly among us, carrying more than we'll ever see, asking for nothing but deserving everything. Some heroes don't need medals. They just need to be seen. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, shared, and remembered, help us keep the silence from fading. Like the video, share it with someone who needs reminding. And subscribe to Endless Stories, because here we don't just tell stories. We honor legacies, one quiet man at a time.